We would have the last session in this track for today. It's on topic human firewall. We have two esteemed guests to present this session. First one is Sai Venkataraman. Sai is the CEO and co-founder of Security Advisor and was previously VP at FortScale, a UEBA firm acquired by RSA. Before FortScale, he was Director, Product Management at McAfee. Welcome, sir. And our another guest is Sivanath Somanathan, CISO for Freshworks, with a decade of experience of CISA in Tata Telecom, RR Donley, Verizon India, 20 plus years experience in advisory on cyber security matters and consulting for Fortune 100 organization. Welcome, gentlemen.
It's my privilege to be here and to be here with Shiv. Just to introduce what our company does. I'm co-founder and CEO of Security Advisor, and our company is focused on building a human firewall. Historically, if you look at security incidents, more than 90-95% of incidents are caused by employees, by humans. And in this new world, the topic for today is digitalization. We find that humans use lots of apps. So, what we wanted to talk about is how do you build a human firewall? But just as importantly, how can security teams facilitate innovation? How can we measure security outcomes? People never talk about measuring security. Security has always been like insurance. You buy it and you forget about it. So how can we actually measure if security initiatives are working? I'm happy to be here with Shiv. We've been collaborating on a lot of exciting things, and he is the CISO of probably the most innovative company in Chennai, if not India. So, we'll talk. This slide is intended to set up this session today. This slide, we talk about the problem. The problem is that there are too many security incidents. Most of those incidents are caused by human actions. And modern employees, they use lots of apps, lots of applications. What that means is that people have lost control. Security teams do not have control anymore. Data, there's no perimeter. There's nothing that you can circle around to secure. And what that means is that risk has also gone up. The big challenge is that security guys are always seen as the people who say no. And what we want to do is help security teams say yes. When employees say, can I use this innovative application? We want the answer to be yes. And the big problem there is that when such things happen, the risks go out of control too. There are hundreds of applications employees can ask access to. And that means that some of those applications may be unsafe. So, what we are trying to do, and Shiv always talks about this, is democratize security. Democratize security in smart ways. And how can we, this session will delve deep into how we can actually secure humans, how we can help them secure themselves in smart and clever ways by providing them tips at the right time. I'll hand over the mic to Shiv so that he can talk a bit about the approach we've used at Freshworks, and then I'll come back and talk a bit more on this.
Great, thank you so much, Sai. Good evening, all. Shivnath Somnandar is my name. Please do call me Shiv. As Sai mentioned, I work for Freshworks. He's been so humble enough to say it's the most innovative company in Chennai, but I'm sure all of you have heard about Freshworks. How many of you have heard about Freshworks? Oh, that's great. Wonderful. So I don't have to introduce the firm and what we do, but essentially, the first day I took the job, and I was meeting the leadership of this wonderful firm, the two questions they actually told me were these. The two questions they actually asked me were these, right? They asked me, Shiv, you're coming from a very traditional security paradigm, right? And we need that. We need, our products to be secure, our products to be compliant. But what we also need is alignment with culture, right? Now, in my years, I was actually hearing it as we need cultural transformation within the organization to be security conscious, right? But what it was really told to me was among the 9 cultural principles within Freshworks, there are 2 cultural principles which actually stood out quite voraciously for me as a CISO. One was taking smart risks, right? So there's a culture code that says, do take smart risks, because that's the only way we can innovate and be creative as an organization, right? And I'm sure this is something which resonates with most of you as well in your in your organizations too, especially who are trying to do some kind of a bimodal organized way of introducing products and services to market, where you have something which is anchor, flagship, ready for the market, matured and state of art. The others could perhaps be in more of an incubationary mode, where you're still testing and trialing and seeing if it actually is accepted by the market or not, right? So smart risks was one culture code which they told me to have security aligned for. And the second one was we trust by design, right? Which both of this were a little antagonistic to wanting to drive security and compliance ethically, right? So we have to look at a little intellectual way of driving security. Now, how do we drive security with central ordinance where we set policies and ask all staff members to follow? Right? That's the usual perform which most companies do follow. But what we had to do was to slightly change the pitch. We had to say, look, let's do security together because it takes a village, right? Let's democratize security. Let's make sure that you guys understand that you're part of the ecosystem as well, right? Where you, when I say you, all employees of the organization, not just employees, even partners and clients as well, where we have to get the feeling across to all of the members who contribute to the whole security posture of the organization in a form and manner that they own and are being accountable for all the practices that require basic hygiene, right? So that's one of the ways that we want to introduce, a platform like what Sai was talking about, where behavioral transformation has to start from bottoms up. There is a top-down approach of policy, governance, and ordinance being flown through, but there is also a behavioral transformation that is required from bottoms up. So we tried the whole model of, and this has actually been only about a year of journey, but we have a long way to go. We know that. Having said that, we believe that our employees are going to be the first responders for all security-related challenges and issues that we are going to face, right? So we're making them stronger. How we make them to be their own firewalls, if you will. The other thing that we want to make sure is that we are not being intrusive. We are not being obstructive of any innovation and creative regimen that they want to run within themselves as well, right? So there are teams which require to have a certain level of free will and freedom in terms of what they need to experiment with. We need to make sure that we're not cutting too many corners. So in technical terms, we were actually trying to see if we can create a more bimodal security, again, where there is something that we need to do as a baseline, but there is also a few things that we perhaps have to trade off, but make sure there are compensating controls to reduce our exposure as well. So transforming the organization from purely looking at compliance focus to now making it more risk aware was where the journey was starting off, right? Last but not the least, nothing can be, considered as achieved unless we measure the outcomes of it, right? So we need ways and means where we can actually put our feelers in, understand how are we keeping in terms of progress of this behavioral transformation that we're looking for. Not just seeding in awareness, but we're also making them cautious and conscious. And what we typically talk in our language as transcendence, right? We want to make sure that they are above the costs and they understand why we're doing it as well. So for companies like Freshworks, where typically more than 60% of the employees are actually owners of the company as well, they have stocks. They will probably understand this language better as to why they need to protect their own interests, right? So the whole idea of becoming that first responders and human firewall is probably more immersive when you try to sell it out to a crowd which understands that they need to protect their own interests as well. So from a standpoint of results, what we've seen is a drastic or a significant impact to how we are seeing humans or staff alluding to the practices that we are asking them to, and not just wanting to take an annual refresher, if you will, just for the sake of ticking a box or doing compliance checks, but making sure that they understand the objective of why we are asking them to do certain things, and also help us in innovative ways with their ideas and opinions on how we can do it differently, meeting the same objective. Like for example, if you were to talk about high privileges that are required in their endpoints for doing certain development tasks, right? How do we co-brand security in such models where privilege is still given, but in a very sandboxed model, so that their experimentation, their tests and trials are all happening within a certain controlled environment, then actually trying to impact a larger network or production ecosystem, if you will, right? So those are the the balance mechanisms that we were looking at in terms of wanting to drive within Freshworks. So 99% reduction in malware, 100% of employees. Now, I don't consider the second point to be very a significant outcome, although it's just good for a compliance standpoint, but the idea there was to make sure that we're continually keeping them trained. We're not just keeping them trained once a year, but we're keeping them coached throughout the year as much as we can. Last but not the least, the innovation pace. We are making sure that those cultural elements that we talked about in the beginning are not being impaired as well, right? So innovation creative still has to be in the same velocity of what the organization is looking for, as long as we make sure that security is also built in by design, right? And by default, perhaps in certain cases. Over to you, Sai.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let me start with a question to you. When you think about cybersecurity overall, there are some problems that we've listed here. What do you think is the top problem? The voting button. We've listed some 5 problems. Can we see the results? Perfect. And that's roughly true too in terms of incident profile when 76% of you say that users create incidents. So we wanted to share some real data with you, real experiences with you on what works, what does not work, how do you measure these outcomes, and that's the intent of this session as well. When you look at this slide, this is a real slide. We actually profiled a few employees and we looked at what are the applications that a typical employee uses today. Employees use applications in communication, in productivity, in development, go-to-market, customer support. Then there are all the personal employees. Professional life, personal life, it all mixes together. Today it's hard to distinguish, what a professional laptop is used for, a mobile device is used for. And employees, this means, an expanded risk profile, the surface that needs to be guarded is that much more. And there are hundreds of apps, this is just a snapshot that employees use. What does it translate into? What that translates into for a chief security officer is that there are so many different paths for a hacker to actually get into an organization, for an employee to get compromised. Employees fall victim to phishing attacks, online scams, social engineering scams, weak passwords, stolen passwords, shared passwords, out-of-date system, risky public Wi-Fi. All of us connect to public Wi-Fi. When we go to Starbucks or to a coffee shop, we connect to the Wi-Fi. There may be 4 Wi-Fis with the same name. So there are lots of employee actions that can actually result in compromise. How can we avoid that? We wanted to actually focus on that in this session. And when you think about cybersecurity overall, actually when we were talking to some insurance companies, they taught us to think like this. And what they said is, think about anything as people, process, technology. Technology is antivirus, firewall, analytic systems, SIAM, SOC, SOAR, whatever. Process is what the CISO defines, their team defines. People is what this session is focused on. We need to fortify people. Traditional training clearly does not work. So what more can we do? Does democratization of security work? Does real-time awareness coaching tips work? And our answer is, there is a combination of approaches that's actually needed to fortify people, and people alone is not sufficient as well. We need to focus on technology, process, people, and build a virtuous cycle across these 3 for results to actually happen. The second question, in terms of technology, process, and people, where do you think the biggest gap is in terms of today's security setup? If I were to ask you, an honest answer, where do you think, if we were to define cyber as people, process, technology, where do you think the gap is? Again, yeah, and that's actually quite interesting as well. And I agree with that. Process, people, technology, all 3. They are gap areas. But it's interesting to see that 54% of you believe that there is a big gap in terms of people, and especially in this digital age, where people can engage with multiple things. Ultimately, it comes down to the human, and technology is a crutch as well we can use. And now, we wanted to get to the most important part of this session, which is how do we, as we engage with people, what are the sensors with which we can detect risk, and how do we actually engage with employees? As you can see, there are 4 charts that we show, and we believe that data is the key to doing everything, even human engagement. And on the left-hand side, on the top chart, we are looking at who are the employees who get spam. The second chart on the right is actually talking about who are the employees who are seeing phishing attacks that were stopped. We can pull this data from email gateways. We can pull this data even from Microsoft or G Suite. The third chart talks about things that happen on the endpoint, your antivirus, if it picks it up. The fourth thing is login activity. The key to any organization and any security initiative is to actually measure risk in tangible ways, and that's an important focus of this session as well. So we can actually use data from email, data from online activity, data from login activity, access activity, and we build that to profile users, understand risk, and usually, within the organization, 5% of users account for like 95% of incidents. If you can identify that 5% and the root cause of why those 5% keep causing incidents, an important part of what we do is to figure out a teachable moment. And in any organization, profiling risk, understanding users, especially understanding users, why they are risky and who are they, that can actually help in designing initiatives. The second part of it is once we do that, we can actually zero in on where's the problem. Is it a specific department? Is it a specific location? Is it by infection channel? Is it because people are using USB devices? Is it because people are going online and doing things? Is it because people have a tendency to click on email phishing links? Is it because of out-of-date systems? So, zeroing on a few top priority issues after profiling all the different sources of data is actually quite critical as well. Let me hand over to Shiv. Once the profiling is done, then you actually need to act on it. And I'll let Shiv talk about his experiences in Freshworks, actioning on initiatives that could help people.
That's okay. Thank you, Sai. So as he mentioned, the one-size-fits-all philosophy for security sometimes may not be the best philosophy as well, right? Typically, if you if, for example, if you have an incident in your organization that you feel we need to take the learnings back, sometimes what we do is we take the learnings and we spread the awareness across to all employees again, right? Just in some sense, it also creates a feeling of being reprimanded for no reason. And the other thing that we also see is, we have this habit, or for all practical purposes, I think it was a carry forward practice, if you will, that we always reprimand the people who are defaulters. But we also don't find avenues where we can incentivize people who are actually maintaining good hygiene as well, who are actually your good Samaritans, if you will, within the organization, right? Who are upkeeping security in a way and form that you expect them to. And perhaps also help you in a way of, providing more context, giving more innovative solutions and ways and forms in terms of driving control hygiene, right? So starting with looking at aspects of how we can keep coaching them on a real time, and that too with the attention span that we have these days, especially with millennials. You can't expect a guy to go through a 30-minute session and then perhaps answer another 30 questions and then score an 80% mark and not do that without proxying, right? All of you agree that we see a lot of proxying happening in an organization? You all agree? In show of hands? Right, so that's an evil, and no one talks about that, right? We all know that we still do it because it's a tick box requirement, it's a compliance requirement, right? As long as somebody gets it done, yeah? But how do we really create that transcendence, as I talked about before, right? So real-time coaching really helps. It's about a 3-minute or a 6-minute transactional. In fact, it's more animated, it's more visual graphic driven, so that catches the attention. It also helps in being more immersive as well. So, and it's very, very apt for the moment or the context within the user. For example, if a user is using a collaborative channel like Slack, and for whatever reason he's inadvertently sharing sensitive information on the Slack channel, right? Imagine if there is a bot that's coming back quickly and telling you, look, we find that there is something which is perhaps sensitive against the policies of the organization. You might want to check if you want to continue, feeding that information in the Slack channel that you are in currently, and perhaps go through a quick 3-minute session to understand, 3-minute video to understand what are the consequences if you do it, right? And besides the policy violation, what would be our state as an organization as well. Now that kind of immersive learning experience, real time, during the moment, is probably more powerful than actually telling him to go and take an annual refresher at the end of year. Agreed? Right, so that's real-time coaching there. We also convert this to more behavioral bite size as well. For example, with new employee onboarding, what you could typically do is, again, we have this habit of accumulating all the mandatory trainings that they need to do at the start of the onboarding itself, right, where they get little fatigued in terms of taking all the courses, and some organizations actually give anywhere between 60 to 120 days to even finish your mandatory training. By all means, you can expect it to be proxied as well. Right, now imagine if you're able to change the behavior by looking at something which is more apt, for the onboarding experience that he's going for. So for example, if it is an engineering a staff member who's joining on and he has to get access to the code repository, which perhaps is GitHub or GitLab. Imagine if you have a curated course that actually takes him through the whole hygiene aspects of how you should use GitLab based on what we have seen as an organization, right? Before he gets onboarded, before he gets an account and starts using it. And that's perhaps for another 6 or 10 minute session as well. He would gladly take it, right? Because you see sometimes these apps on your mobile, which after you download the first time, it actually takes you through a quick, help and tips about how to use the app effectively, right? Something like that. That concept in a model where it's within the attention span of the employee, if you can deliver, make it more immersive, that would probably be more retained and creates a transcendence within the staff that's required. Now, from a standpoint of also looking at behavior, we also need to understand the context of the role and what ecosystem he's more applicable for as well. So again, you don't need to do a one-size-fits-all philosophy here. You can quickly understand the persona of the staff member and then curate the coaching moments that you need to give him. And last but not the least, we have seen enough analyst reports to tell us that more than 70% of attacks today typically happen through email, right? Phishing is probably the largest threat vector that we have actually been accustomed to. Now, there are multi-channel phishing attacks, which few courses can actually give you the real context of how you can keep yourself protected, but if you are able to give a coaching moment based on the channel and let them know as to how they can identify and quickly respond to such attacks, we have a first responders good Samaritan within the organization. So that's the whole intent of this slide in terms of how we have done it, and perhaps would be a good precedence for us to set as well. A good program obviously involves consistent and continual learning, and this cannot be re-emphasized in any other way other than saying that security also needs to be part of the culture as well, right? We need people to not just understand but also behaviorally transform themselves, and that can only happen when you're continually keeping them cautious and conscious, right? So the focus should be again on perhaps the high-risk users within the organization, so quickly identifying who your high-risk users are and keeping them in a continual regimen of making sure that you are curating programs for those users alone. See, that's how you prioritize security also, right? You don't have to do a one-size-fits-all again, right? You can obviously target those high-risk users, and for those high-risk users, if you have to socialize it with their senior management and make sure that they are doing their bit at least to push it down, all the more a better impact that we can create. The coaching that we give is again associated with actionable guidance, so it is not just telling them what the consequences, but also telling them what they should not do and do. The do's and don'ts in a way that they can understand, perhaps even gamified in lot many aspects as well. Last but not the least, I think it's all about making sure that you have measurable outcomes, right? So coaching users, capturing feedback, measuring your outcomes, and then feeding it back to again keep identifying your users. This vicious cycle is where I believe true transcendence from a security standpoint can happen. So this is what we did. This is a quick reflection of real data that we have seen. I've not put the numbers out there just so that you get an illustration of how it has happened for us. So the target of 10 plus threats were obviously the first priority that we wanted to make sure that we are reducing, because those might be the first channels or vectors of how we as an organization could be impacted security-wise. We trained them on best practices. Some of them, in fact, have given us feedback on how the training has been, and have also helped us curate the training as well, make it more contextual. So we have obviously got a context as a holistic reviewer, but if you can have the employee also give you in terms of saying specifically what he's doing that we can relate the context to, nothing like it, right? So the context also and the content also gets curated. We also have abilities where we can cognitively collect information from various sources. For example, if you look at a typical use case for an employee, besides the corporate IT tools that he uses like an email or a business collaboration or a messaging tool, there is obviously the other tools that he uses for his day job as well. For example, if he's an engineer, he would have his own engineering tools that he would use. Now, is there any tool in this market that actually gives you a cognitive context with both of this together? That's where we want to achieve, because that's what gives you the security quotient of the stuff for you to understand how you want to behaviorally transform the user as well. This is a great number to say. We actually gave this continual coaching over a period of 2 quarters to actually understand how the number of infections have reduced from anywhere between 90 to 92% to less than 1%, if you will. That was a great story to say. And I'm not saying that it is only because we have used this tool to actually capture feedback, measure outcomes, and drive that transcendence, but it's also the users themselves as well, imbibing it, right? And then helping us in terms of identifying more avenues where we could actually keep coaching people. Yeah? So this is like it's a very adaptive life cycle which we as an organization needs to understand and adopt for how it needs to be trained, how it needs to be evolved, how it needs to be transformed. All right, so we have a quick question here around democratization of security. Now, I think this term was used before by Sai, but technically what we're trying to say here is, make security everyone's problem, or rather everyone's challenge, right? And do you believe that that's probably the best ordinance we can have for an organization in this new age digital world, if you will? Can you quickly vote on this so that we can have a pulse check? All right, so that sort of certifies my ideology of what I was trying to say, right? We also have another question as well as to where you can use assisted technology, assisted intelligence also for helping you through this whole coaching, lifecycle management, and behavioral transformation moment. Do you believe that that's also required as well? Isn't it something that we are seeing as a norm today where not only are we using AI and ML for improving performance, productivity, optimization of business processes, but I think that can also drive transcendence as well, right? So again, that's my opinion, but I want you guys to help me with a pulse check. All right. I guess we don't need any more validation, right? So I think this seems to be the common quorum that we understand how we need to evolve, human security transformation. So Sai, you want to take this?
Sure. So there were also other outcomes that we wanted to measure. One outcome is endpoint malware rate. Other outcomes can be things like out-of-date systems. And really, one of the outcomes that we are really fond of is positive security behavior. How many users don't just use passwords, but also use two-factor authentication? How many users report phishing messages? How many users become your eyes and ears and are starting to encrypt their messages? So can we measure positive security behavior? Can we look at updates and agents versions? Do we have the latest version? So when you look at cybersecurity metrics overall, we want to talk about negative things like malware infection rate, users being targeted by malware. We wanted to talk about positive things like users reporting phishing, users turning on two-factor authentication, users beginning to encrypt, do not forward features, when they share data, limiting permissions. The beauty about it is, in the previous company when we were getting acquired, Microsoft told us that today there's telemetry available on what people do in every platform. So when someone shares data, we can actually as a company measure who's sharing data, how are they sharing data, are they granting the right permissions. as a security team, the beauty of that is we can use it to measure, what's going on. We don't need to be invasive and tell users or coach users every time. But for our own organization, we can start measuring these metrics. We can measure which users are more safe, which users are less safe, and use that to do a personalized contextual awareness program. And the other thing we also recommend is when you measure what's going on in your companies, look at it by department, look at it by risk. Build a dashboard very similar to this one, where we can talk about all the different departments and you can talk about different risks, email risk, endpoint risk, users who turn on two-factor authentication, out of date. So you can zero in on that and you can build allies. Department heads are your allies. Many departments may even have, if you're a large enough company, data protection officers and so on. But fundamentally, as a CISO, one of our biggest topics and one of the things that we want to share is that you need to build allies within your organization. Also, you need to isolate risk. You need to find who are the risky employees, who are the risky departments, where are the risky geographies. And so zeroing in on the problem, being surgical, drilling that small little hole in your organization where you see the problems and correcting that, that's the best possible approach. This is something we've used quite effectively as well. We even build individual dashboards around which users are risky and then share it with them, making information more widely available, gamifying it, having rewards, and worst case, if you see the same user get infected again and again, maybe link it back to HR and reviews. So, building individual dashboards, that's actually an approach we've seen work quite well. But overall, the theme is there's a bunch of outcomes that you can consistently, continuously measure and score it, track the metrics, track your outcomes, see if your initiatives are working, and if they don't work, you go back to the drawing board. But often you'd find that some initiatives work, some don't. Learn from the ones that work and use those lessons to continue innovating. Thank you very much.
That's just a quick snapshot of who we are as a company, what products we sell. Essentially, it is to serve the business user experience, the employee experience, and the IT users experience as well. We are an 8-year-old company. Essentially, we have become a unicorn last year, this year is obviously we've touched wood. We've had continued growth from a target market of looking at SMB as our comfort. We have now moved and elevated ourselves to looking at also serving the mid-market and enterprise clients as well. So that's a quick suite. Do feel free to check out the website and the details about the products as well. So I think the intent here was not to pitch or sell you about Freshworks, but it is about to share the journey that we have taken with our partner, which is Security Advisor Bot, and tell you how true human firewall and transcendence can happen, right? If you have your act and your game right. So it's not just gamification. It's about making sure that you trust your users to do the right things as well, right? And making it contextual, making it continual and provide them those coaching moments and which is more immersive in nature. But also do not forget to reward, incentivize good behavior too, which is very, very important. We don't see that in many organizations, but I think it can drive home the message that good Samaritanship can come also with incentivization too, right? So that's it from our end. Thank you so much, Sai and Isaka, for giving this opportunity. Any questions, maybe for 2 minutes?
Artificial intelligence and machine learning. Is your product using artificial intelligence and machine learning in the awareness?
There are many ways in which we use AI. One way is figuring out anomalies. So when you ingest data from email, from IT tools, you need to figure out who are the risky users. And risk can often be measured by anomalous activity. So some user, average email malware for a user may be 5, but there may be a group of users who may be receiving a lot more. There may be groups or teams of users being targeted together. So just assessing risk has a learning element to it. What is normal for the organization? What's normal for the department? What's normal for the user? So figuring out anomalies, there is learning. There's always some machine learning in the analytics. The second is what works in delivering outcomes. So when we work across multiple customers, we can actually see if a poster approach, game-based approach, comic-based approach for a specific teachable moment, what sort of awareness tips delivers results. So AI ML is fundamentally works when there is some learning effect, and so we use it for two things. One is figuring out through analytics a teachable moment. Second is delivering the right awareness tip to that user. And there is ML in both.
I just realized I didn't need the mic at all.
Two questions.
Do we have time? Just
Two questions.
quickly.
One
Sure.
is that, like, what is the headcount of your organization?
Roughly about 2,500.
Okay. Second is, I think you showed about Bangladesh. What is the issue there? Because we hear about some other countries which create trouble in the cybersecurity space, whereas I'm surprised to
No,
see.
that's just an illustrative disguise chart. And so we just wanted to, that one chart was actually disguised data. But the intent is to show you that there's always some geography, some team where the culture is maybe to share data. In this instance, by the way, what happened was that team had a tendency to use the same USB devices. And the same USB devices were going around and they were all infected, they're spreading infections. In that particular geography, there's an exemption granted by IT in terms of AV and all of that. So often, security problems tend to be local in nature. And the intent of that slide was to say that you may want to look at geographies as well when you're measuring security.
It's a bit of cultural sensibility also that drives, in terms of what you might want to have the users understand and be coached for. So that's why it was more of an illustration, not to say that they are doing a nation-state campaign.
It's not a commentary on the security situation in Bangladesh.
True.
I was worried about that.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. So voting time, please take your voting pads. Finish it? Okay. Fine. I invite our speakers and also our Chapter Vice President, Mr. Mangesh Kalyaraman, to present the mementos.